So, for those who haven't seen the first interview, who are you and what do you do creatively?
I'm Tom. I'm from the northeast of England, and I'm a poet and photographer mainly.
Lovely stuff. Now, Tom is the winner of our recent challenge. The theme for the challenge was Visions of a Better Future. And we're now going to hear a reading of your entry that was entitled Hanging Curtains in the Panopticon.
Visions of a Better Future, or Hanging Curtains in the Panopticon. A philosopher mused on the ideal of a prison, a perfect penitentiary playing on paranoia. A hollow cylinder stacked with cells on the inner walls. Bars run the length of each unit. The condemned are given their uniform and their schedule. There would be no managing or struggle, no need to break or bend them. In the centre, a watchtower permanently manned. At any time they can be looking at any cell. At any time they can point their gun or call reinforcements. The tower accessed by traipsing down subterranean tunnels. The prisoner cannot see the guard. The question asked, need there be one? Though allegorical, it worked. Many were built this way. When the world fell into ruin and it was time to rebuild, we found one intact. Such a place can hold another purpose. A group of us started taking down the barbed wire and unlocking all the doors. We found a chair for every room, microphones linked to the speakers once used only to put out orders. In the tower we placed an architect with a sketching table, charcoals and paper. I hung curtains in the doorway of every cell, a veil to hide every person voicing visions over faulty audio equipment, masking their speech. We left the walls raw, illustrating ourselves, or at least giving ourselves that chance. We used the tunnels to place each person, one at a time, unknown to one another, hidden. We gave them the tools, gave them brief instruction. Forget how it was. Another future is possible. Try.
So, in terms of the Panopticon itself, just for those people who don't know to what we're referencing, I have to confess I can't remember the name of the person that invented it. And I say that as somebody who studied criminology as well, so I should know better. But can you just quickly talk us through the essence of the Panopticon and how subverting that, obviously, which is at the core of this poem, kind of what you were seeking to achieve?
Yeah, so the Panopticon is a concept by British philosopher Jeremy Bentham for the perfect prison, one that can be run by just a single guard. So it's essentially a cylinder, and there's floors and floors of cells, but the cells are obviously barred off but totally open. And in the middle is a tower, and the tower is accessed by a tunnel underneath. And the tower is constructed in such a way that the prisoners cannot see the guard. So that means that at any point, the guard can be watching you, or the guard might never look at you. You would never know. But Bentham proposes that the prisoner will always assume that they are being watched because they've got no confirmation otherwise. And so the idea was, and this made its way into actual prisons. Plenty of prisons have been built that way. It's less common now, but a few do still exist, and it seems to have been pretty effective. But there's been a sort of resurgence in the thought of what the Panopticon is in the digital age. And so a lot of people liken the way that we're being tracked via social media and our internet presence generally as a sort of digital Panopticon, and especially in the wake of some of the leaks from WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden. And what that means, and is it then that we are the prisoners in that scenario because we're always being watched? Is there a part of us that doesn't express ourselves properly? Does our online presence become mostly performative? And those sorts of questions.
Referring to the poem itself, can you talk us through your thought process when you were putting it together, and kind of how you got from that initial thought to the finished piece that we've just heard?
Yeah, so based on the theme, I had a totally different idea and a totally different medium that I was going to submit for it. And while I was making that entry, I had a thought that was very, very visual of that just popped into my head of what else visions of a better future could be, which was that famous illustration of the Panopticon, but someone's put curtains over all the doors, thus rendering the Panopticon useless, or perhaps it has another use. And then I stayed with it, and I was like, well, why have they put curtains up? What are some not just neutral uses of the Panopticon, but positive uses? So I thought, well, rather than the tower as the watcher, but then we can have the tower as the receiver of information and the receiver of thought and idea. And I thought, well, these people are curtained off, they're veiled off, which then made me think of the veil of ignorance, which is Rawls's original position. So that then became the information that the tower was receiving. And originally I thought, well, maybe I don't have time to submit this idea as for the challenge, because I wanted to do it in a different medium, as a diorama or a model of something. But I was talking to my friends about it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to quickly throw a poem together, and I wrote it, and then I did maybe one revision a couple hours later, and it was pretty much ready. It was there. And I was really happy with it because as an image, I find it really striking, and I really enjoy it on that level. And so yeah, it's a sort of literary entry because it's a poem, but in my mind, it's very, very visual.
In a more general sense, how often would you say you start a piece with like a really strong sense of what you're looking to achieve? And is that like the more common approach, or do you go into it sort of fairly freestyle and just kind of see what happens? What's your sort of approach in general?
I think I do a bit of both. In obviously in this instance, yeah, I had a very strong image of what I wanted to achieve, of what I wanted to come across in that poem. But often I'll think of a concept and I'll just write and I'll try and find it, and sometimes that means doing hundreds of revisions, or maybe even just trailing off and say, you know, it doesn't work, I'll come back at another time to that idea. But I said this in my last review, a lot of my poems are very short, and so what I need to do is get to a punchline very quickly, and in that sense, I don't know if that's a strong image I'm trying to create. I think it sort of is, because a lot of them are quite you try and build an image. It's not a wordplay punchline. It's a punchline of a sort of an amusing scenario. So I guess that comes under the strong image category. But again, I will just ramble on and write, and then if something comes out of it, great. If not, well, I had fun writing for half an hour.
Yeah, no, that's entirely fair. So I guess when it comes to writing the more sort of comedic pieces, then, so is it a case that you almost come up with the punchline first and then work your way backwards, or like how do they sort of come together?
Yeah, so usually it's I come up with a sort of mundanity, a modern day mundanity, and I think, how can I obscure it in some way, make it really strange, bizarre, in a way that someone might find amusing. And so sometimes I'll have that come to me straight away, the strange thing comes to me straight away. Sometimes it's I sit down and I feel like I need to write. It's like, well, what did I do today? I got up and got on the bus to work. Okay, well, what would be funny about getting the bus to work? Well, what if the bus to work was not a bus? What if it was a Formula One car? What if the bus was one of those trailer trains you get at visitor farms? And then I'll try and find a way to get there. And how do I find it amusing? Well, I think being annoyed at something funny is even more funny. And so then you play the character. So I think start with a punchline is where I go with that. But again, the poems are so short the start, middle, and the end are this far apart, it doesn't really matter.
I mean, that's an art in itself, though, I suppose, isn't it? The ability to be succinct and those sort of things is a skill. It is a skill, which if you've ever heard me tell a joke, you'd understand entirely. Because yeah, it's harder than it sounds. What have you been doing creatively since we last spoke?
I've been writing a bit less, but I've still been writing. I've been sharing stuff a little bit less as well. I took a bit of the last poem was about burnout, and so after that I'd say yeah, probably best to wind down a bit and put a little bit less pressure on. But I've been working to build myself back up. I started working on a zine which is got some sort of spooky themes in it, so I'm thinking if I can get that ready by October, that would be fun. It is a post-apocalyptic guide to the northeast of England, which is a series of poems and then also sort of informational sheets to go with them. So I've been doing more of that's sort of halfway written, but I've got till October to do it, so I'm now taking a step back. And it'll come to me when it comes to me, because originally I want to get that out. I had the idea in the sort of last week of September. I thought, can I whip this up in a week and get it out for this October? No, you can't. So I thought, well, I've got a year now. So that's what I've been working on. I've also been trying to sort of prepare to launch the first Northern History Week, which is going to be a series of cultural events that me and some friends are putting on, basically as sort of a guerrilla cultural activity. Totally no authorities are involved at all. I just like history and I like the North. I like Northern history. I think there's a bit of Northern exceptionalism in me, and I think it's about time we have a week to celebrate that history through art fairs and poetry nights and open mics.
It sounds good to me. I like the sound of all of that. The post-apocalyptic guide to the North, was it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's that. Just as a title alone, that's got me interested. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Right. So before we get into the more fun aspects of it, I thought we'd do a serious question, because politics. So what I was going to ask was, part of the inspiration for the challenge was to try and find ways of thinking about the future in a more positive way, given the amount of doom and gloom around, and just the general feeling of nonsense that we have in our day-to-day lives at the moment. What are your thoughts on kind of optimism on the left, and what kind of things give you a feeling of hope? What sort of green shoots out there have you seen that make you feel good about the future?
Yeah, I think optimism's hard, especially on the left. When you see, being on the left constantly is advocating for things that you think will make life better for everyone, and constantly in British society you get shot down and you get told no, it's not possible, and that gets disheartening a lot of the time. But there's something really special about relentless optimism, and refusing to stop advocating for change. And being around people that share my politics is lovely. Not that I'm saying that I'm in an echo chamber or anything, but being around people who want to make life better for people and have ideas of how to do it is good. Like the Discord server, we're all very like-minded that things are a bit shit and could be better, and obviously we think we know how. But I think being shot down doesn't really ever change your mind if you know something, and there is a shift. It's something we can't take for granted, and something we have to keep working towards. but younger generations are more liberal and more left-wing than previous generations. They are young people. That's not to say young people are entirely left-wing. Young people are also susceptible to the right and the far right. But we are starting to see a change, and that people are fed up with the order, whether they then swing even further right or whether we actually give some leftism a chance for once. It's going up to about a 50-year time where we do get a chance for about a decade. Maybe it'll stick this time. So when I was workshopping this poem, I say workshopping, when I sent out the first draft to my friends, because I told them about the idea. I said, "Oh, look, I've written up into a poem. Tell us what you think." And one of them is not politically trained at all, but has did learn a bit of philosophy through game theory. They did music at uni, and through that they did game music, like music that is a game. And so they learned some game theory to go through with that. It's really interesting, actually. And so through that, he got interested into other philosophy and read a bit. And I think he's also left-wing and quite liberal, and is also very frustrated. But beyond that frustration of just like knowing that things aren't right, he feels not educated enough to engage with everything all the time. He is very educated, and I think that's a very honest and very wise decision sometimes to say, I don't think I know enough to comment, which I think is wisdom beyond I have, because I feel like sometimes I bite at every bit of bait that I see. But he said, I woke up in a bit of a strop. Now I wasn't feeling great. But your poem really cheered me up, because I mean the poem does have this bit of like, alludes to a sort of downfall of society first, but it's like even if society does collapse, there are those green shoots of hope still. Nothing is forever. There is always a chance to improve, so long as there are people there to advocate for improvements.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as you were talking, then I was reminded of some videos I've seen by, I think it's Andrewism on YouTube, who does a lot of solar punk content.
All right, yeah.
This kind of idea that, all right, things are probably going to get a bit worse, but ultimately it's just going to be different, and we'll find ways to make it better, during the process, because change might also mean the bad things change too,
Yeah.
And I think holding on to that sort of hope that things will be different, but different doesn't mean worse, is kind of a key part to to hanging on to what little we've got to hope for at the moment. But
Yeah.
no, cheers for that. That was a good answer.
Yeah, I think we see this across the British public in whether they swing right or left, and the whole thing about Brexit. A large proportion of our country, it has very little. Britain isn't a rich country. Britain is a reasonably middling country with a few very, very rich people in it. And so people are willing to try anything that comes up. Well, the Tories have been in for a decade and they've done nothing. All right, we'll give the other team a go. Well, is the EU actually helping us? I feel like I'm quite poor, so I guess we'll vote out and see if anything changes. What's the worst that could happen? And yes, the country is technically poorer for it, but my life hasn't changed. Like, if I went on holiday a couple of times to Europe, yeah, it might change, but I don't. My wage hasn't changed, my job hasn't changed, my public transport hasn't changed. So nothing in my life has changed since Brexit. That's not to say I supported it or didn't. I can see arguments either way, to be honest. But people are willing to try things, and that's they seem to be trying some bad things quite a lot of the time. But maybe sometimes they'll try something quite nice, and we've got to keep pushing for it in the hopes that one day the Great British Public will say, yeah, all right, that one, we'll do that one next. And you say, yes, okay, let me show you how you do it.
I love the fact you're brave enough to bring up Brexit without being coaxed into the question. I like that. Very brave. Let's talk about some more fun. So one of the things we talked about ahead of this interview was talking about the media you enjoy and kind of extrapolating a little bit out from that, what we can learn about you and the things you enjoy. So I don't know if you want to go through sort of by category. We can talk about, books you found really interesting and that sort of thing, and then move on to the other sort of medias as we go.
Yeah, I mean the obvious book to start off with is 1984, which is a totalitarian state, and our main character finds one corner in his flat where he thinks he can't be seen. Quite early on in the book, and that's sort of a safe haven for him. It's been a while since I read 1984. I can't say I engage with it 100%, but I do enjoy Orwell's work. But something that really engaged me when I was younger was it was originally a webcomic and then it was published as a graphic novel. It's by Brian K. Vaughan. I think it's called The Private Eye. And so the idea is that there's a huge data leak and everyone's online profiles are exposed, and sort of permanently, because you can't uncork that bottle. And so everyone's online life sort of becomes their real life. And on the street, everyone wears masks, sort of really elaborate masks of like animals or funky designs and stuff. And there's this whole total flip of their lives, because obviously you think currently of your in person, you go to work, that's the real you, and then you go online and maybe play some games or you chat to some online friends, and that's maybe you're an alternate self. But because of this data leak, it becomes totally the other way around, and that was really interesting. And again, links to this idea of a digital panopticon, but rather than it being the government or a tech company watching you, it's everyone, and it's everything, and it's a flood of information about you. Should anyone want to see it, they can. And so you cover up in real life because you don't want people to recognize you as you're the guy that did the weird stuff on the internet. And there is a bit of that now, but usually you hide your face on the internet and not in real life, obviously. Whereas it's flipped in the graphic novel. I really enjoyed that one. Which then leads us, because Brian K. Vaughan also wrote on the TV series Lost, which I watched fairly recently. And I don't want to spoil anything because it is a wonderful television show that everyone should watch. It sets a high bar for legacy television. But you get the idea very early on that there's something not quite right going on at the island. And there's a few kooky things that happen, but it certainly seems that the people that were involved in the crash are always a step behind. And you think, well, how could that happen? Are they being watched? And certainly at some points they are. There's also this, like the station with the computer. You could say that the people inside were victims of panopticism, and all the stations bar one, actually, because one of the stations is a panopticon, basically. There's also characters you could identify as the tower or the guard in a panopticon, be it the man in black or Dharma, or even Vincent the dog, I think could maybe be the tower, because he always turns up at just the right moment. So yeah, I enjoy that aspect of it. But the core concept of the Panopticon is just paranoia, and how that plays on it. So any time you see paranoia in media, you can apply the Panopticon, which is what I've basically been doing for the past 2 weeks.
It's interesting because I'm looking down, obviously, the list you sent over of the things you've been enjoying, And I noticed there's a couple of themes, one of which I'll approach in a question after this, after we've gone through a couple more bits. But I was just sort of thinking that the things you just mentioned, so the 1984, the Private Eye, and Lost, all have an element of a show that I've been enjoying recently, which is The Traitors, which which is all from a Russian psychology experiment designed to test what happens when you have an informed minority and an uninformed majority. And it's funny how, like, when you phrase it that way, how many of these different things fall into that sort of framing. The idea that, yeah, you know, you're left wondering, whereas there's a very small amount of people who very much do know, kind of thing, and everyone else is kind of left guessing. So it's quite an interesting theme. If you haven't watched Traitors, maybe you should. I'm guessing from what I'm seeing here, maybe you might enjoy it.
Yeah, let's give it a go.
So one of my observations, if you don't mind me like reading out some of the stuff you mentioned. So you mentioned Philip K. Dick's "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" Fantastic. Obviously, the basis of Blade Runner. You mentioned Blade Runner the movie as well, which follows. The Matrix, Truman Show. A lot of these things again have that same dynamic, which is really interesting. 2001. You've got here Big Brother, another good example of that. And then the games you mentioned. So you've got Half-Life 2, Portal, Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
So very sci-fi heavy.
Yeah, very sci-fi heavy.
So what I was going to ask is sort of an easy question for 10. Why do you think you're attracted to sci-fi as a leftist?
Yeah, I think sci-fi is very well. It can go one of two ways. Either it represents hope really, really nicely, and it's a vision of a perfect future. You know, something like Star Trek, where humans have sorted themselves out, and they've go out and have adventures, and it's lovely. Or it plays into a sort of cathartic doomerism sort of aspect, which it's like, well, what are the problems we have now? What would those problems be like amplified when we've had time in the future for those problems to develop? And then we can then view those heightened examples through our own eyes and see, well, yeah, I could see that becoming a problem. Maybe we should sort that out now. But I think I'm not just attracted to sci-fi as a leftist. I think I'm attracted to sci-fi for visual reasons and art reasons as well. Not that is devoid of politics. Obviously, that has its own politics. But I really like sci-fi. I mean, usually, in a lot of cases, sci-fi is set in space, which means that your characters or your story are very, very isolated. So then you can pick one problem and boil it down to that. So Alien, for example, my favorite film of all time. It's visually stunning, but also you've got this issue of you've got this corporation who are dead set on one thing, and that's profit. They come across what is an existential threat to human life, and there is an informed minority on the ship who pushes the mission in a certain direction rather than the welfare of what's basically a bunch of miners or truckers in space. So there's that sort of cathartic way of examining issues on a very isolated scale and a very heightened scale. Definitely appeals as a leftist.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually, and one that I hadn't thought about myself. So thank you for that. Very good answer. It's interesting you mentioned Alien. It's also one of my favorite films. But I was going to ask how you feel about kind of fatalism in sci-fi and the kind of chosen one trope. It's quite a big part of modern sci-fi, I think, where it tends to come down to one person that, for one reason or another, is the correct person to solve the problem. And do you feel like that is a problematic method of storytelling as a leftist? Because I know certainly from my perspective, I sort of feel like there's not many stories which talk about coming together and the average person being responsible for agency, you know? What are your sort of views on that sort of storytelling, the chosen one, etc.?
Yeah, well, I certainly get the frustration 100% when it's, I think we're seeing a sort of crossover of sci-fi and fantasy now, and fantasy was always the prophecy and the chosen one rises up to defeat the great evil, because that's their fated journey, which I think you can make a case of is quite conservative, but I enjoy fantasy as well. And then we're seeing that crossover into sci-fi. So I think a lot of the sci-fi I enjoy actually either isn't a sort of chosen one, or maybe they're just, the issues can't be solved. So another film I really enjoy is Akira, and the end of Akira is this sort of massive disaster, and there are fantastical elements to Akira, but sort of our main characters, while they try very hard to stop it and to save their friends, they are very much passengers in what happens. And I think Ellen from Ripley is, well, obviously it does boil down to a one person saving the day, because she saves herself and the cat. But I think that doesn't have to be viewed through the lens of a chosen one or an individual thing. They do try to work together to defeat the alien. It just doesn't work. And, you know, she's a woman, which is essential to that story. She's right from the beginning. She's correct that, and if her advice had been followed, none of the events of the film would have happened. So she sort of earns her survival. But I think you're right. There is this sort of, in Cyberpunk 2077, there's a very specific quest in that where you have the option to just sort of give up and leave it. And it's the one where you get involved with a husband and wife who are politicians. I don't know if you played the game. But you find out about something nefarious going on while you're trying to help them, and it turns out sort of what you have to do is just give up and let it happen, because you can't help. You're not the chosen one, and it's depressing, and it's sad, and it's annoying, and there's no catharsis in it because you don't get to be the hero, which is obviously what you want from a video game. But also it's really satisfying and refreshing to have a different take on that. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'd like to see more solidarity and class consciousness in my media. Who wouldn't? I think it's great. But then again, you can make the argument that the left needs leaders, and if you identify with the protagonist of a story who turns out to be the one who rallies the army or defeats the alien, then maybe that's helpful in its own way. So long as you don't, take it to your head too much and think I'm the future king of the world. Maybe it's nice to identify with a hero and think, I think good stories will say that, all right, maybe they are strong and maybe they were the one to do it, but the Ratatouille method, maybe it's not that anyone can cook, but that good cooks can come from anywhere.
I'm glad you mentioned that because in the list of films that I went through earlier, there was one film that stood out from all the others that was quite different from the sort of very sci-fi heavy selection. So I was going to ask you about Madagascar.
Yeah.
So tell me about Madagascar.
Yeah, so at the start of Madagascar, our characters are a lion, a zebra, a hippopotamus, a giraffe, and some penguins in the New York Zoo. They spend their whole life being watched by kids and families and zookeepers. They're weighted on hand and foot. All they know is being watched. And the zebra, Marty, gets sick of this and decides he wants to not live how he has known all his life and return to the natural order, the way that he thinks he's supposed to live. He wants to go back to Africa. And so they break out, and we see these characters try to readjust to not having the conveniences of the zoo and not being watched 100% of the time. And you see Alex the Lion really misses it. He really misses not being what he really misses being watched. He really misses the performance. But he then later comes to realize actually, it's quite nice here in Madagascar. It's a kids' film about dancing monkeys, but I thought maybe there's a theme I can identify in there. So why not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was an interesting one. I like outliers. They're always they can often tell you more than the majority in a lot of ways. What are your hopes for 2025? And this can be personal, global, whatever you like.
My hope is as always that we gain class consciousness as a working class and rise up and seize the means of production. But specifically, I think my hopes are that we in the UK realise the legitimate threat of the far right by viewing what's going on in the US and learning the lesson from them. I'm not convinced we will, but that is my hope politically. My hope personally is that I can get something published this year, either self-published or in a collection. That'd be great. Like I say, I'm working on this scene. I've been doing poetry for 4 years now, properly. So I think it's about time that I get something out there. Not for any sort of, I'm not going to make loads of money selling them. I just feel like it as a bit of personal development and progression. That's what I want to do. That's my main aim for this year.
Very laudable aim it is too. Right, we are going to do a quick fire round. So the first one, and I've taken a bit of a punt here because you haven't mentioned it other than in passing. But what is the best Star Trek?
The Next Generation.
Or if it was to be revealed that we were all going to be resurrected, what would you like to be resurrected as?
Ooh. I think myself again. If no one else is getting resurrected themselves, I can be myself again and be different.
That's genuinely, I don't know anybody else that would have come up with such a unique answer. So fair play. Would you rather attend a concert or a comedy show?
A comedy show.
What is your favorite Disney movie?
Ooh, Treasure Planet.
That's another good, random one as well. Okay, I like that. What is your favorite dessert?
Ooh, what am I feeling right now? I think I would a cherry bakewell.
What is your favorite feel-good song?
Feel good song. I Can't Quit by the Vaccines.
This is going to be a controversial one. What is the best breakfast cereal?
It's Cocoa Pops.
It's a solid choice. Solid choice. And then the last two are linked to your last visual appearance in a video of mine. Who is the best manager that Newcastle has had in your lifetime?
My life. Oh, I mean, I'm enjoying this right now. I think Rafa Benitez is one of the best managers of all time. He's certainly a candidate. And gone too soon from Newcastle, I think. Sir Bobby managed Newcastle within my lifetime, so I have to pick Sir Bobby Robson. I think that is the only correct answer.
It is pretty much the law in
Yeah.
your neck of the woods, I'm afraid. Yeah. So it's that or Keegan, right?
Yeah.
King Kev. And then the final one, which is also a football question: peak Shearer or peak Isaac?
Oh, peak Shearer.
Right. So we're going to wrap up with a couple of bits now. So, how can people find you and your creations?
I'm at Tom Does Poems on Instagram. I think Thom Robson 88 on both Instagram as a photography account and on Blue Sky. I think that's my Blue Sky account. Yeah, that's where you can find me these days. I think that is. Oh, and please go follow Northern History Week, which is just at Northern History Week everywhere. Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you very much for both entering the competition, the challenge, and for doing such a good job with it that you won, obviously. What is your parting word on the importance of creativity in general and on the left?
I think creativity isn't an optional thing. It's something that human beings need to do. You need to create something, and it's important to have something of a hobby that you make something. There's beyond just having something to do. It's having a sort of a sense of purpose beyond just your work, and having something nice that you can share with your friends. And I feel like in the modern world sometimes it's a bit embarrassing to say, look, I knitted something. I've written a poem, especially among men. Your hobby is fantasy football, and that's it. I feel like that's the and gaming. Those are the range of acceptable hobbies. I know far too many people who don't have any hobbies at all. I think creativity is an innate human need that we need to make time for. And for those of us on the left, doubly important that if you can channel your thoughts and your optimism and your ideas for the future into some sort of art or creation, then you're not just advocating for those ideas when there's an election, you're advocating for them with every piece of art you make, and with every minute you spend on that thing as well, you're advocating for it, which is great personally to feel like, oh, well, not to say that, my poem's so important and I'm a great person for writing it. It's sort of an ease of mind that I'm doing, even if it's tiny, I'm doing something to advocate for a cause.
Love it. Thank you very much for your time again. It's always a pleasure. And we'll talk before long, I'm sure.
Cheers.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.